Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 81, White's Self-Explosion, A Complicated Love Triangle. The Hogyoku, a treasure that could transcend all limitations, was meant for someone who possessed unlimited potential and countless trump cards. Only such an individual could wield its power perfectly. It was destined for him. As this thought lingered in his mind, the battle between Shiba Ishin and White had already shifted toward Karakura Town. Karakura Town had long been within the jurisdiction of the 13th Division. Sensing the intense fluctuations in spiritual pressure, a squad of stationed Shinigami rushed to investigate. Upon arrival, they immediately spotted Shiba Ishin engaged in combat. One of them stepped forward, intending to assess the situation. But before he could even speak, a blinding Zero White's hollow flash obliterated him instantly. From a distance, Uehara Shiroa observed the battlefield intently. He was certain the man behind the scenes was about to make his move. Sure enough, Shiba Ishin soon noticed a change in the hollow's movements. The creature had become faster, its spiritual pressure heavier, and most alarming of all, its fighting techniques had started incorporating Shinigami battle styles. Ishin's sharp eyes narrowed. "It seems that you're not just killing Shinigami for fun, but to evolve," he muttered. "The more Shinigami you devour, the stronger and smarter you become." Ishin's grip on his Zanpakuto tightened. "A monster like you, there's no way Soul Society wouldn't detect your presence. Someone must be covering for you." His expression darkened. "So, who is it?" As he spoke, his spiritual pressure surged. He was preparing to activate Bankai. His Zanpakuto, Injetsu, was deadly in its Bankai state. Once unleashed, its sheer destructive power could incinerate anything in its path. However, there was one condition: if his physical state wasn't optimal, he couldn't fully activate it. And at that critical moment, a sudden, cold, and merciless killing intent erupted from behind him. Before he could react, a devastating slash tore through his back, sending him plummeting to the ground like a meteor. As Shiba Ishin crashed into the earth, realization dawned upon him. A Zanpakuto attack. His breath was ragged. A Shinigami is backing that monster. His mind raced. Who is the traitor? Where are they hiding? Yet, despite his sharp instincts, his spiritual sense detected nothing. A deep, ominous feeling settled in his chest. It felt as if he had walked into an intricate trap, carefully laid out long before he arrived. But there was no time to dwell on it. Above, White let out a beast-like roar before launching another violent hollow flash straight at him. With no choice, Shiba Ishin had to abandon his thoughts and focus solely on survival. Yet, wounded and unable to activate Bankai, he gradually fell behind in the fight. Above the battlefield, three cloaked figures observed the battle from the shadows: Aizen Sasuke, Tozen Kaname, and Ikimara Jin. Their spiritual pressure was completely concealed, hidden behind layers of Keto barriers, along with sound and sense suppression spells. To Shiba Ishin, they were completely non-existent. To Aizen, Ishin and White were nothing more than laboratory mice, their lives and deaths irrelevant. With a faint smirk, Aizen mused aloud. White. What an intriguing experiment. His glasses glinted in the dim light. A creature with a blackened exterior, but a pure white interior. Even seasoned Shinigami fail to withstand its hollowification. Then, a soft chuckle. I wonder, what kind of surprise Captain Shiba will bring us after he succumbs to hollowification? Aizen had been covertly aiding White for some time now, ensuring the creature's uninterrupted hunting spree. After all, White had the potential to evolve infinitely, devouring Shinigami to grow stronger while possessing the unique abilities of hollowification and spiritual transfer. However, there was still one missing element: a suitable carrier. And so, Aizen devised a perfect trap, luring Shiba Ishin into the fold. For Aizen, Shiba Ishin was the ideal experiment. After all, he wasn't just any captain, he belonged to one of the 5 great noble clans. Though Aizen scoffed at the so-called noble bloodlines, they still served a purpose as experimental material. Beside him, Tozen Kaname and Ikamaru Jin remained silent. Yet their sharp eyes never left the battlefield. What Aizen and Shiba Ishin didn't know was that everything had already been seen? From the distant park, Uehara Shiroa had witnessed Aizen's movements clearly, his perfected observation haki cutting through every illusion. What invisibility cloak? What Kido barriers? What Kyoka Suijatsu? In the presence of absolute perception, they were all meaningless. Just then, his haki sense extended further, capturing a new arrival entering the battlefield. His eyes lit up. She's here. A high school girl with orange hair, wearing a Japanese school uniform, ran toward the chaos. A knowing smile played on his lips. Pure-blooded Quincy, Kurosaki Masaki. He let out a low chuckle. Shiba Ishin, looking for a wife? But you'll have to take the mother's surname. After all, this young girl, this pure-blood Quincy, was destined to become Ichigo Kurosaki's mother. The Shiba family and their hereditary love for schoolgirls, truly, some things never changed. He looked at Kurosaki Masaki, then thought about Inoue Orihime. Both were JK, Japanese high school girls. Both were selfless saints. But Masaki, unlike Orihime, was a true saint. Not the kind of saint who simply forgives enemies. A dangerous glint flashed in Uehara Shiroa's eyes. As for me, he smirked coldly. I believe in revenge when it's due. If someone wrongs me, I'll pay it back tenfold. It is God's duty to forgive our enemies. My duty is to send them to meet him. At this moment, the wounded Shiba Ishin was completely overpowered by White. His opponent's horns pulsed with energy, rapidly gathering a powerful Siro, poised to obliterate Ishin in the next second. Seeing Ishin on the brink of destruction, Kurosaki Masaki reacted instantly. Without a word, she raised her bow and unleashed a barrage of Heilig File, the Quincy signature holy arrows of destruction, straight at White, who loomed high in the sky. From afar, Tozen sensed the sudden appearance of an unknown Ryuryoku and immediately reacted. Someone unexpected has arrived. I will eliminate them, he said before preparing to act. However, Aizen extended a hand to stop him, his lips curving into an amused smile. Wait a moment. Let's see how this unfolds. He didn't despise unpredictability. On the contrary, he welcomed it. Especially when the unexpected was this interesting. Aizen had long studied the Quincy. Their dwindling numbers made them an endangered species, but their abilities still intrigued him. The Quincy's power of annihilation, which could erase spirits entirely, was one of the few forces capable of disrupting hollow evolution. A true wild card. Sensing the imminent danger, White immediately abandoned his assault on the injured Ishin and lunged toward Masaki instead. But Masaki didn't flinch. Instead, she continued firing spirit arrows in rapid succession, each one cutting through the air with lethal precision. However, White was too fast, his movements fluid and agile as he evaded every shot with ease. Seeing this, Masaki stopped dodging entirely. She stood still, her expression unreadable. From the sky, Ishin, Jin, and Tozen frowned at her apparent inaction. What is she doing? Ishin thought, struggling to rise despite his injuries. In a flash, White reached Masaki, wind howling as his monstrous form closed in. With a predatory gleam in his eyes, he opened his massive, beast-like jaws and clamped down on Masaki's shoulder. But the moment he bit into her, Masaki smirked. Got you, she whispered. Before White could react, she fired a point-blank spirit arrow directly into his skull. The hollow recoiled violently, his mask fracturing under the devastating force of the Quincy's power. With a final, guttural screech, he crashed to the ground, motionless. Silence followed. Both Ishin and the observing Shinigami were stunned. She took the attack head-on just to land that shot? Ishin muttered, eyes widening. Jin narrowed his gaze, a small smirk forming on his lips. That was unexpected. Meanwhile, Aizen adjusted his glasses, his interest deepening.
How fascinating.
Far in the distance, Uehara Shiroa, who had been silently watching from a concealed vantage point, nodded in approval. She must have used the Bloodvene, the Quincy's defensive blood technique, he murmured to himself.
No wonder she wasn't injured. However, White's body suddenly convulsed.
Despite the devastating wound, something unnatural was happening. The Hollow's flesh began to pulsate, as if a malignant force within him refused to die. Masaki, feeling the strain of battle and the energy drain from using her abilities, hesitated for a brief moment. That brief moment cost her.
Before she could react, White's hollow hole swelled grotesquely, his entire form mutating at an alarming rate.
A sinister energy surge erupted from within him, dark tendrils writhing as his body became unstable.
Masaki stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden transformation. Isshin, however, didn't hesitate.
In a flash step, he appeared in front of Masaki and raised his Zanpakuto.
White self-destructed. A blinding explosion engulfed the battlefield, a violent shockwave flattening the surrounding trees and sending debris flying.
When the smoke cleared, Masaki was unharmed.
But Isshin lay unconscious on the ground. Masaki gasped, rushing to his side.
Gently, she lifted his battered form, concern flickering in her usually steadfast eyes. After checking his pulse and confirming he was still alive, she let out a sigh of relief.
Still breathing.
Idiot, she muttered, shaking her head. After a brief exchange, the two formally introduced themselves. Despite standing on opposing sides, with Quincy and Shinigami history steeped in bloodshed, Masaki and Isshin spoke without hostility.
Instead, they talked eagerly. As if they weren't supposed to be enemies. However, unbeknownst to them, another party was approaching.
Watching from the shadows, Ishida Ryukin, accompanied by his maid, Katajiri Kene, finally arrived. Ryukin had always been pragmatic, taking every measure to ensure the continuation of the pure-blood Quincy lineage. That was why, despite his personal opinions, he had accepted Masaki into the Ishida family when she was young, raising her as a child bride meant to one day secure the Quincy bloodline.
In other words, Masaki was Ryukin's fiancée.
And now, he stood there, watching as she interacted warmly with a Shinigami. His face darkened. Aizen and the others continued observing from above, but Uehara Shiroa had long since lost interest in their political maneuvering. Now this, he mused with a chuckle, this is real drama.
His only regret? That he hadn't brought popcorn. He then turned his gaze to Ryukin, whose expression remained eerily blank. Right now, he's not the arrogant Quincy he'll become.
He hasn't yet said those infamous words, I have no interest in being a Quincy, and you have no talent.
Instead, the Ryukin of this moment looked tired. Like a man who had already lost something.
Next to him, Katajiri Kene watched him with complicated eyes. She had always harbored feelings for Ryukin, but her impure bloodline had placed an unspoken barrier between them.
For now, their fates remained uncertain.
But one thing was clear, this was the beginning of a chain of events that would change everything. Meanwhile, Isshin and Masaki had already parted ways, waving each other off as they returned to their respective paths.
Seeing that the show was over, Uehara Shiroa retracted his haki.
At that moment, Aizen, standing high in the sky, suddenly frowned. He swept his sharp gaze across the surroundings but found nothing unusual. Beside him, Tozen sighed in disappointment. I originally planned to use this battle to lure out Shinji and the others, continuing the previous holification experiment, but in the end, they didn't take the bait.
I thought they'd be interested in the Hollow's transformation.
According to their intelligence, Urahara Kisuke, Hirako Shinji, and the other exiled Shinigami were hiding somewhere in Karakura town.
However, despite their best efforts, they had yet to pinpoint their exact location.
Aizen remained silent for a moment before he responded, his voice calm but thoughtful.
Did Urahara intervene, or have they simply lost faith in Soul Society? He smirked slightly, then shook his head. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to the grand scheme.
Aizen's gaze sharpened as he continued, besides, we've already begun narrowing down their location. They'll fall into our hands sooner or later.
There's no rush. After saying that, he turned to Jin and asked, "Jin, did you feel like we were being watched just now?" Jin's expression remained unreadable, though his narrowed eyes became even sharper. The question caught Tozen slightly off guard as well. Was Aizen asking Jin rather than him, the one with the greatest spiritual perception?
Still, Jin gave a casual shrug.
Ho! Being watched, you say? That's a funny thing to ask, Captain Aizen. Tozen frowned, recalling the events carefully.
From start to finish, he had sensed nothing unusual, no fluctuations in Ryatsu, no trace of unfamiliar presence. If someone had been spying on them, it was either an illusion, or the work of an entity beyond their detection.
He finally spoke.
Lord Aizen, I didn't sense anything, perhaps it was merely your imagination.
Jin smirked slightly.
Or maybe, he drawled, you just got a bit paranoid.
Aizen didn't laugh. Instead, his gaze drifted upward as he muttered. Illusion?
His expression remained unreadable. I don't believe in coincidences, and I certainly don't believe in illusions caused by mere incompetence. Though he found no concrete evidence, his instincts, the same instincts that had allowed him to manipulate Soul Society from the shadows for centuries, were screaming at him.
Something had been there. And if he couldn't perceive it, then what kind of entity could?
Tozen and Jin exchanged a quick glance, an unspoken thought passing between them.
Could it be Squad Zero? Even as they returned to Hueco Mundo's secret laboratory, Tozen found himself uneasy.
His concerns only deepened when he checked the spiritual energy readings from their latest experiment.
What? The self-destruction of White successfully transferred the experiment's energy?
His voice was laced with frustration.
That wasn't the plan.
As his gloved fists clenched, he snapped angrily, why did the energy transfer choose a female Quincy instead of Shiba Ishin?
What a waste!
Aizen, however, only chuckled, his expression shifting into one of amusement.
Don't be so disappointed, Tozen.
His glasses gleamed as he turned toward the data readout.
Sometimes, deviation from the original plan is precisely what leads to true transcendence.
His voice took on a subtle excitement. A hollow choosing a Quincy, one whose power is the natural antithesis to its own.
He exhaled lightly. Fascinating, don't you think? Don't you want to see what happens next?
At that moment, the trainer Aizen awakened.
Meanwhile, in Karakura Town Park, Mikey Hane nestled obediently into Ehara Shiroha's arms.
Once again, she felt that peculiar sense of security. A warmth she had never received from her own father.
Shiroha absent-mindedly stroked her hair, his gaze distant as he lost himself in thought.
The love-hate entanglement between the Shinigami, the Quincy, and the Hollow was certainly entertaining, but ultimately, it was insignificant in the grand scheme of things. What truly mattered was the boy destined to change everything.
Kurosaki Ichigo. The potential of that orange-haired brat was nothing short of terrifying.
After all, he would one day become the king of slashes, a swordsman whose sheer destructive power shook even Yawatch himself. While Ichigo's raw talent wasn't quite at the level of someone like Uehara Shiroha, who could grow infinitely stronger, he was still destined to become one of the strongest beings in the Bleach universe.
Whoever controlled Kurosaki Ichigo, controlled the future. Shiroha knew this fact well.
It was for this reason that old monk had been deliberately suppressing Ichigo's Quincy abilities. Because he wanted to ensure that the boy remained loyal to the Soul Society.
Shiroha, too, wanted Ichigo on his side.
That was one of the reasons he had come here, not just to witness this historic moment, but to guarantee that the plot followed its intended course. Only by ensuring the right events unfold, he mused, can I properly trigger my future missions.
However, now, he wasn't so sure. Could it be that his interference was too minor, that the storm his presence created was too small to change the tides of fate? Or was there someone else secretly orchestrating all of this?
As this thought crossed his mind, Shiroha's gaze turned toward the Soul King's palace. During the 1,000-year blood war, that old monk Ichibai Hyasube had toyed with both Yawatch and Kurosaki Ichigo, pulling the strings of fate in ways no one had anticipated. In the end, Yawatch had replaced the Soul King, becoming the new keystone that held the world together. working endlessly, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Shiroha couldn't help but wonder. Had the Soul King planned all of this from the very beginning? Was he simply tired of lying dormant, waiting for the day he could finally stand up and move freely? And had he, the supposed keystone of the universe, used Yhwach as nothing more than a convenient scapegoat? Chapter 82: The Power Beyond Calculation. If this was true, even Yhwach would have to kneel down and write the word pathetic in shame. But truthfully, it didn't matter either way. Even if these people could calculate and predict Ichigo Kurosaki and Yhwach's every move, they would never be able to calculate him. Shiroha's confidence stemmed from potential that surpassed everyone else's.
No matter how strong others might be, they were merely fragments of the Soul King's power, unable to surpass the original source. After all, the Soul King was the wellspring of death itself, the origin of annihilation and all full-bring techniques. The Soul King stood as the eternal ceiling of the Soul Society, an insurmountable peak. No one could transcend it. No one except Shiroha, who possessed the unique task system. This gave him the unshakable confidence that he could never be outmaneuvered by the monk or the Soul King. In fact, given the opportunity, he would be the one to calculate this ancient black-robed monk who had lived for tens of thousands of years with only these meager accomplishments. Such a limited scope of ambition. In the days that followed, Shiroha didn't return to Soul Society. Instead, he remained at the court army's base, occasionally offering guidance to Mishibane as she practiced her full-bring techniques. After spending this time together, it was evident that Mishibane had grown more attached to him, more obedient to his instructions. Yet she still had much to learn, not just in terms of raw power, but in cultivating her mind and understanding of the world. Pure, naive beauties held little allure for Shiroha. Such women were already at his fingertips, all of them pure and flawless in their own way. Only those with truly exceptional temperament could capture his genuine interest. For a woman, identity, status, temperament, and self-confidence were vital attributes. Beauty that radiated from the inside out, without any shortcomings, that was true beauty. Only such women were worthy of Shiroha's time and energy. The rest were merely fleeting amusements. This was why Shiroha rarely interfered with the personal development of the women around him. He preferred to let them grow freely, enjoying the spectacle of their blooming like flowers in their own time. As evening descended, the rain continued its steady rhythm against the roof. Mishibane had changed into a white lace-made dress, engaging in role-play with Shiroha. Her inexperience was evident in her awkward performance, but her attentiveness and eagerness to please made up for her lack of skill. Shiroha patiently guided her, collecting what he jokingly called his tuition fees along the way. Just as he was beginning to lose himself in the moment, his spiritual senses tingled. Activating his observation haki, he captured a scene unfolding in the distance. The spectacle he had been waiting for was finally beginning. Meanwhile, at Urahara shop in Karakura town, 4 figures had gathered: Kisuke Urahara, Isshin Shiba, Ryukin Ishida, and Masaki Kurosaki. Masaki's condition was dire. She lay unconscious on the tatami mat, her face contorted in pain. A black hole had appeared in her chest, unmistakably a hollow hole. This alarming development had forced Ryukin Ishida to remove Masaki from the Ishida family compound. The bloodline of the pure-blooded Quincy could not be tainted. In their eyes, Masaki was now defiled, no longer of use to the Ishida lineage. But Ryukin, unable to abandon his feelings for her, had chosen to seek help elsewhere, to save her regardless of the cost. On his desperate journey, he had encountered Isshin Shiba, who had once again ventured into the world of the living. Isshin recognized immediately that Masaki had fallen into this crisis because she had saved him from a hollow attack. Guilt weighed heavily on his broad shoulders. So when these two men, both consumed by self-reproach, heard there might be a way to save Masaki, they followed the mysterious figure before them without hesitation, arriving at this unremarkable little shop tucked away in Karakura town. Isshin couldn't shake the feeling that this stranger seemed oddly familiar. Ryukin, however, was too consumed with worry to give it much thought. Looking at the two anxious men before him, Kisuke Urahara, wearing his distinctive green and white striped bucket hat, introduced himself. "My name is Kisuke Urahara. I was exiled from Soul Society, and I've been studying something similar like this girl's condition for nearly 100 years. As someone who had long monitored Soul Society's affairs, he was well aware of who Isshin Shiba was, and suspected Isshin might recognize him as well.
However, his introduction was primarily for Ryukin Ishida's benefit. It really is you. Isshin's expression darkened as recognition dawned.
He had seen this man a century ago, Kisuke Urahara, former captain of the 12th Division and director of the Department of Research and Development. The years in Urahara's current Jigai made him almost unrecognizable, especially without his Shinigami uniform or captain's Hayori. Recalling the crimes Urahara had allegedly committed, Isshin couldn't help but worry if this might be a trap.
Ryukin interrupted Isshin's thoughts with an impatient shout. It doesn't matter who you are. Didn't you say there was a way to save her?
Hurry and restore her to normal. Self-recrimination consumed him.
Why hadn't he tried harder to stop Masaki from saving the Shinigami? Why hadn't he intervened in the battle sooner?
His usual calm demeanor had completely shattered.
Isshin realized that whatever schemes Urahara might be plotting were irrelevant now. The most important thing was saving the young woman before them.
Her condition was deteriorating rapidly. There was no time to waste and no other options available.
Urahara glanced at Masaki, who continued to struggle against her affliction.
A rare solemnity settled in his steel-gray eyes. I'm sorry, but I cannot restore this young woman to her original state. I call this condition soul holification, and it's irreversible.
Once it begins, there's no returning to one's former self.
Without special intervention, her condition will only worsen. But you said you could save her. Ryukin's voice cracked with desperation.
Urahara nodded slowly.
I cannot restore her to her original state, that's true. But if we simply want to save her life, to allow her to continue living as a human, then yes, there is a way.
What is this solution?
Isshin asked, his voice steadier than his racing heart. Recalling that bloody night a century ago, Urahara adjusted his hat brim and explained.
Holification refers to the influx of hollow power into other souls. This process breaks the boundaries between spiritual entities and can enhance a soul's potential. However, it's an uncontrollable technology and extremely dangerous.
Souls that lose their boundaries eventually lose all control, continuously collapse, and ultimately self-annihilate. It was because of the holification incident 100 years prior that Urahara had been forced to flee Soul Society. That event had revealed to him the horrifying truth about Aizen, the Hogyoku, and the process of holification itself. The pursuit of power was instinctual for most spiritual beings. They rarely resisted holification's allure. But the process was too dangerous, its consequences too unpredictable. If implemented on a large scale, it could shatter the balance between worlds. Such technology should never have existed. In the dimly lit shop, Ryukin demanded impatiently, how do we save her? What must I do? You need do nothing, Urahara replied, his gaze meaningful as he studied Ryukin's face. The only way to halt the self-destruction of a holified soul is to stabilize its boundaries with an opposing force. This preserves the soul's integrity and maintains relative stability. Urahara gestured as he continued. Let me offer an example. A holified Shinigami possesses both hollow and Shinigami powers. In such a case, using a vaccine derived from Quincy Racier arrows in human souls could arrest the holification process. But for a holified Quincy, a vaccine alone is insufficient, because Quincies have no natural resistance to hollow power. I don't understand, Isshin's brow furrowed as he struggled to grasp these concepts. What exactly are you saying? Urahara explained patiently, simply put, we must introduce an opposing spiritual power to save Masaki, a particularly potent one. Moreover, this power must remain present indefinitely to ensure her soul doesn't destabilize. Despite Urahara's detailed explanation, confusion still clouded Isshin's features. Ryukin, however, trembled as understanding dawned on him. Impossible, he cried out. There must be another way. His face had drained of color, his eyes reflecting hopelessness. You're quite perceptive to understand so quickly, Urahara sighed. But the choice isn't yours to make. It belongs to him. He turned to face Isshin directly, his expression grave.
The power that opposes a Quincy is that of a Shinigami. The power that opposes a Hollow is that of a human.
This young woman is now a hybrid of Quincy and Hollow, so she requires both Shinigami and human powers to stabilize her soul's boundaries and prevent complete hollowification.
Urahara's gaze bore intuition as he delivered the final revelation. To save Masaki Kurosaki's life, Captain Shiba, you must provide the power of a Shinigami.
As Urahara spoke, he retrieved a specially prepared object. A physical vessel he had crafted years ago in anticipation of such a need. This is a specialized jigai that embodies the power of humanity, he explained, holding it up for inspection. Should your soul enter it, Captain Shiba, you'll become a hybrid of human and Shinigami.
This fusion will provide the counterbalance needed to save Masaki.
Urahara's eyes narrowed, his tone grave as he continued.
However, once you enter this jigai, you will completely lose your Shinigami powers. From that moment forward, you can only exist as an ordinary human. You may not even retain the ability to see hollows. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Unless this woman dies, you will never be free of this limitation. Moreover, the hollow influence within her may pass to future generations, requiring your power to suppress it indefinitely. Urahara looked directly into Ishin's eyes. Even knowing all this, do you still wish to save her? Urahara doubted that the captain of the 10th Division would abandon everything in Soul Society merely to save a Quincy. Such sacrifice seemed fundamentally un-Shinigami-like. Ryuken's thoughts raced desperately. This offers him nothing but disadvantages. How could he possibly accept? Of course I'll save her, Ishin declared without hesitation, surprising both onlookers. You're explaining too much. Just tell me what to do. I enter this jigai, correct? Urahara couldn't mask his astonishment. Is that so? Do you truly hold no attachment to Soul Society? Ishin's response came matter-of-factly, though his eyes reflected deeper emotions. How could I not? There are countless things I cannot easily surrender. But even so, I must save her, otherwise, the man I become tomorrow will certainly look down upon the man I am today. Ryuken stared at the scene, speechless. To save a Quincy, someone who was nearly a stranger, this Shinigami was willing to sacrifice everything. Ryuken had always adhered rigidly to family traditions, prioritizing the preservation of pure-blooded Quincy lineage above all else. Personal feelings, individual interests, everything had to yield to this singular purpose. This rigid adherence to tradition had directly led to Masaki's current desperate situation. Compared to this Shinigami whom he had previously regarded with contempt, Ryuken's own stubborn principles now seemed like a cruel joke. Working together, Urahara and Ishin initiated the procedure to save the hollowified Masaki. Using Ishin's power as a captain-class Shinigami to create a spiritual boundary, they successfully halted Masaki's hollowification, returning her to a stable state. Her fundamental nature had changed, of course. She was no longer a pure-blooded Quincy, but rather a hybrid whose spiritual makeup had been permanently altered by hollow influence. None of this escaped Shiroha's perception through his observation haki. He witnessed everything with fascination, enjoying what amounted to a three-dimensional version of the anime. It was even more captivating than he had anticipated. While Ishin and Masaki remained in close proximity at Urahara's shop, Ryuken Ishida, having lost both his fiancé and his faith, walked alone through the cold, rainy night. The young heir of the Ishida family experienced profound emptiness, loneliness, and a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Yet even in this moment of vulnerability, Katajiri Kane did not miss her opportunity. Taking advantage of his lowered defenses, she approached this future king with compassion and gentle words that would eventually penetrate his broken heart. Back at the court army base, Shiroha enjoyed Mishibane's attentive massage. He sighed softly. It's a shame I don't have a camera right now. I would have loved to capture an image of the mighty Quincy breaking down like that. When he tries to act cool and aloof in the future, I could show him the photograph. Wouldn't that be priceless? While others fought their battles and struggled with their fates, he observed from afar, enjoying life and rapidly increasing his strength. In matters of lifestyle, strategic planning, and mental fortitude, these people were clearly outmatched. The following day, after spending more time with Mishabane, Shiroha ventured out alone.
Since he was in Karakura town, he decided it was time for a proper conversation with the self-proclaimed humble shopkeeper who was anything but humble. He had always admired Urahara Kisuke. As a resourceful inventor and strategist, Urahara was truly exceptional. So, as someone who considered himself party A in this developing drama, Shiroha thought it appropriate to pay his respects to Party B. After a short journey, he arrived before a small, unremarkable shop that attracted little attention from passers-by.
The wooden sign above the entrance read Urahara Shop in faded characters.
Glancing around, he noticed the absence of both the arrogant red-haired boy and the timid-looking girl who normally staffed the establishment. At this point in time, Urahara had not yet taken in Jinta and Yururu, those potential Soul King candidates.
Urahara Kisuke. Your client's father has arrived, come out and greet your guest. Sensing the various spiritual barriers surrounding the shop, Shiroha didn't hesitate to kick the door forcefully. As a self-styled senior investigator, he chose the direct approach. Today, Urahara would witness the power of the door-kicking brigade. Inside the shop, the dark-skinned and impressively tall Tessai Tsukabshi was gathering spiritual pressure, preparing to unleash a Kido spell. Such an intrusive entrance clearly indicated an unwelcome visitor, so he saw no need for politeness. However, Urahara, who stood nearby, hurriedly halted Tessai's action. Waving his folding fan with a cat-like smile spreading across his face, he called out, "Welcome, Captain Commander Uehara. What an honor to have such a distinguished visitor grace our humble establishment." Despite having made extensive preparations beforehand, no amount of preparation would ever be sufficient when facing someone of Uehara's caliber. Even setting aside his official position, his unfathomable strength alone made him an unwise enemy to cultivate. So Urahara, who typically preferred to remain secluded in his shop, chose to yield at the first opportunity. Tessai, with his dreadlocked hair, regarded Urahara with barely concealed surprise. As the former captain of the 12th Division and director of the Department of Research and Development, was it really necessary for Urahara to be so deferential before a young Shinigami? "Manager Urahara, you've changed. You've become someone I don't recognize." Then realization struck him. Urahara had addressed the Shinigami as Captain Commander. This meant the young man before them was none other than Uehara Shiroha himself. Yet even knowing the visitor was the commander-in-chief of the court army, Tessai remained unimpressed. He had once been the Grand Kido chief of the Kido Corps. In terms of rank and prestige, they weren't so different. Shiroha stepped into the shop, his eyes scanning the dimly lit interior with interest. The shelves were stocked with an eclectic assortment of merchandise, some mundane, others decidedly supernatural. The air smelled faintly of incense and something metallic that he couldn't quite identify, perhaps the residue of recent spiritual experiments. "I see you've been busy with your little science projects," Uehara remarked casually, picking up a small candy dispenser shaped like a cartoon duck. "That was quite an interesting procedure you performed last night. Sacrificing a captain's powers to save a Quincy? Soul Society would have a collective aneurysm if they knew." Urahara's smile never wavered, though his eyes sharpened slightly. "We all make choices based on our personal calculus of value, General." Captain Shiba made his. "Indeed he did," Uehara agreed, setting down the dispenser and moving deeper into the shop. "And what an interesting calculation it was. Love is truly the most unpredictable variable in any equation, wouldn't you agree?" Tessai shifted his weight, ready to intervene if necessary, but Urahara subtly motioned for him to remain still. "To what do we owe the pleasure of your visit?" Urahara asked, his tone pleasant despite the tension beneath. "I doubt you've come merely to discuss Captain Shiba's romantic inclinations." Uehara laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet shop. "Can't a father check on his daughter's future family? After all, what happened last night has set certain events in motion that can't be undone." His expression turned more serious. "But you're right, of course. I'm not here just for social pleasantries. I'm here because you, Kisuke Urahara, interest me tremendously." He turned to face Urahara directly. "A man of your talents shouldn't be hidden away in a dusty shop in the human world. Your brilliance is wasted here. You flatter me, Urahara replied carefully. But I find this simple shopkeeper's life quite suitable. Do you? Uehara's smile was knowing. Or is it merely the best you can manage while you prepare for what's coming? We both know who's pulling strings from the shadows, don't we? The man with the glasses who thinks himself a god. Urahara's fan stilled for just a moment, a nearly imperceptible hesitation that spoke volumes. I prefer to focus on the present, Urahara said finally. The future has a way of arriving whether we're prepared or not. How philosophical, Uehara replied with a hint of mockery. But I didn't come here to speak in riddles. I came to propose an alliance. Now it was Urahara's turn to be surprised, though he masked it well. An alliance? Yes, Uehara confirmed, his voice dropping lower. The game board is being set, Urahara. The pieces are moving into position. Aizen believes himself the master player, but there are other games happening simultaneously. I think you'd prefer to be on the winning side when all is said and done. Tessai's eyes widened at the mention of Aizen, his spiritual pressure fluctuating slightly. And you believe you know which side that will be? Urahara asked carefully. Uehara's smile was confident, almost predatory. I don't believe, Urahara. I know. Chapter 83, A Meeting of Minds. Tessai bowed deeply, then moved with surprising grace for his imposing stature to serve tea. The entire ritual, from preparation to presentation, was executed flawlessly in one fluid motion. Before retreating, he offered a courteous apology. Please forgive our humble hospitality, sir. Throughout the exchange, his mountain-like frame produced barely a sound, his movements as light as a cat's. There was no helping it, he had witnessed this man's terrifying power on that fateful night 100 years ago during the holification incident. They had been powerless against Aizen, yet this man had rendered Aizen himself helpless. It was no wonder that the once imposing Kido Corps commander had become so accommodating, almost performative in his politeness. Seated on the tatami, Shiroa ignored the two anxious shopkeepers, instead studying the internal structure of the establishment with a knowing smile. Impressive work, he remarked, nodding appreciatively. As expected of Urahara Kisuk and the former Kido Corps commander. You've even mastered this forbidden technique. His discerning eye had immediately detected the specialized barrier within the shop, a complex spatial seal designed to isolate and contain. This caliber of protection practically had the word targeted written across its metaphysical signature. The barrier's intricate structure revealed multiple layers of protective enchantments and defensive mechanisms, undoubtedly the collaborative creation of Urahara, Tessai, and Yoruichi Shihoin. Only Aizen receives such special treatment, Uehara thought with amusement. Perhaps he should feel honored. You noticed our Kido work, Urahara observed, genuine surprise coloring his tone. Before their meeting, he had researched Shiroa extensively, piecing together intelligence from various sources. He believed he had developed a reasonable assessment of the man's capabilities. But within moments of their encounter, Uehara had demonstrated perceptiveness far beyond Urahara's expectations. It seemed this young commander possessed exceptional skill in both Zanjutsu and Kido, a versatile master with no apparent weaknesses. His adaptability rivaled Aizen's, but his intelligence and Zanpakuto abilities might be even more formidable. Despite the storm of recalculations happening behind his eyes, Urahara maintained his composed exterior. With a practiced laugh, he offered, "My skills are far inferior to yours, General Uehara. Please forgive my inadequate preparations." Uehara didn't press the issue. He understood Urahara Kisuk well enough, a man not unlike the legendary Batman from Western comics. Both relied primarily on intellect and technical mastery rather than raw power, and both maintained contingency plans for every conceivable scenario. In terms of personality, they shared a penchant for subtle manipulation, keeping one step ahead of allies and enemies alike. But Uehara wasn't concerned about being caught in Urahara's web. He possessed countless trump cards, powers that even Urahara couldn't anticipate or counter. His Zanpakuto, Shunkyo, was among the most powerful space-type weapons in existence, and this barrier, impressive as it was, couldn't begin to seal its abilities. The mind gem he possessed was one of the legendary Infinity Gems, granting him capabilities beyond Soul Society's comprehension.
Even if Urahara dedicated his considerable genius to targeting him, success would remain elusive. Your skills are not insignificant, Uehara remarked casually.
Few can halt holification once it's begun. Urahara's expression shifted slightly at the reference to recent events.
It's merely the result of practice and persistence, he replied modestly.
I've been studying holification for 100 years now.
Inwardly, his thoughts raced. As I suspected, he's been monitoring everything.
Nothing in Karakura town escapes his notice. But how does he accomplish this? Kido? Barriers? Some unknown technology? There's insufficient data to form a conclusion. What a troublesome adversary.
Urahara had already deduced that Uehara might control the video hall in Naruki City, having accumulated substantial evidence pointing to this conclusion.
Yet the question remained, with Aizen's elaborate deceptions keeping Soul Society blind to changes in Naruki City, how had Uehara discovered these developments and maintained such comprehensive awareness? Why did this man always seem several steps ahead, omniscient in his knowledge of events as they unfolded? If you say so, then so be it, Uehara conceded with apparent indifference. He took an appreciative sip of the tea, savoring its rich aroma and lingering aftertaste.
This wasn't ordinary tea, but a premium variety typically reserved for captains and nobles.
For Uehara in his current position, such luxuries were commonplace. But for Urahara, an exile living on the margins, this represented a treasured indulgence, something to be consumed sparingly, if at all.
Someone of your stature must have limited interest in the world of the living, Urahara ventured cautiously. Yet you seem unusually concerned with recent events here.
Behind his casual inquiry lay genuine worry that Uehara might have come for Masaki Kurosaki, the holified Quincy.
To ordinary individuals, she represented a liability, but to those with scientific inclinations, she constituted invaluable experimental material.
Neither Aizen nor Mayuri Karatsuchi would overlook such a unique subject. What's your assessment of Quincy power? Uehara asked suddenly, deliberately changing the subject. Urahara responded evenly, the Quincy's power of annihilation is quite distinctive.
It directly extinguishes souls rather than purifying them. When a spirit entity is annihilated by a Quincy, its soul cannot enter the cycle of rebirth through the three realms. This is why, centuries ago, Soul Society initiated a conflict that nearly eradicated the Quincy. Are you being deliberately evasive? Uehara challenged with a hint of irritation. He knew that holified Shinigami required Quincy power to create stabilizing vaccines. Urahara's presence in Karakura town, along with the Visored, likely related to the pure-blooded Quincy family residing there. It seemed probable that this party had obtained Quincy power from the Ishida family, using it to stabilize Shinji Hirako and the other Visoreds. Uehara found it inconceivable that Urahara could research Quincy power without making significant discoveries. Yet the shopkeeper offered only generalities, a clear indication of his distrust. Without hesitation, Urahara amended his response, sharing his research conclusions with apparent sincerity. I've discovered that Quincy power derives from their control of spiritual particles. They can weaponize these particles using their spiritual pressure, which likely accounts for the devastating lethality of their annihilation abilities. While he typically maintained a cheerful, somewhat carefree demeanor in most interactions, the man before him exerted too much pressure for such pretenses. Urahara didn't dare employ his usual deflections or half-truths. He recognized that Uehara was genuinely dangerous, someone who, once provoked, could not be stopped by any power available to him. Your assessment is accurate, but superficial, Uehara noted. During his time in Karakura town, he hadn't merely been a passive observer. Through his observation hockey in the Mind Stone, he had glimpsed deeper secrets of the Quincy. Similar to Shinigami, the true foundation of Quincy power was engraved upon the soul itself. The Shinigami power system was fundamentally shaped by Ichibe Hyasube and Otsunemea, while the Quincy bore the indelible influence of Yawatch. Nearly all Quincy carried Yawatch's power imprint within their souls, marks that both activated their deeper abilities and functioned as potential time bombs. The activation key and detonator remained solely in Yawatch's possession. Without access to this forbidden knowledge, information that had been deliberately suppressed like a dangerous taboo, Urahara had failed to detect the mystical encoding within Quincy's souls. Though Urahara couldn't identify exactly what he had missed, his intuition was exceptionally sharp. "It seems you have particular interest in the Quincy," he observed carefully. "That's quite unusual. Have I overlooked something significant?" In Urahara's estimation, Shiroa represented an existence beyond comprehension, impossible to touch, understand, or clearly perceive. His experience had taught him that the more powerful an individual, the more they inspired fear in those who truly understood power's nature. Despite his apparent youth, Uehara's strength likely rivaled Aizen's. In terms of raw ability, he was unquestionably formidable, not someone to be challenged lightly. As for being incomprehensible and inscrutable, the reasons were equally apparent. Uehara operated without obvious constraints, seemingly without specific objectives or allegiances. Such individuals typically maintained either perfect neutrality or found themselves systematically excluded from power structures that demanded predictability. "You're quite perceptive," Uehara acknowledged with a slight nod. "Most would simply accept what they see on the surface." He set down his teacup, his expression growing more serious. "The Quincy are more than what Soul Society has portrayed them to be. Their extermination wasn't simply about maintaining balance, it was about fear. Fear of what they might become if they ever united under the right leadership." "And you believe such leadership exists?" Urahara inquired, his voice carefully neutral. Uehara's smile returned, enigmatic and knowing. "Everything that was returns eventually, Urahara. The wheel turns, and what was buried rises again. Soul Society's greatest sin wasn't the extermination itself, it was their failure to complete it thoroughly." "That's a dangerous perspective," Urahara noted quietly. "Truth often is," Uehara replied. "But I didn't come here to discuss ancient history or Soul Society's mistakes. I came because you hold a piece of a puzzle I'm assembling." "And what puzzle might that be?" Urahara asked, his fan now closed and still in his hand. Uehara leaned forward slightly. "The future, Urahara. The shape of things to come. You've been preparing for Aizen's inevitable move, crafting tools and weapons in this little shop of yours. But Aizen is merely one player on a much larger board." "You speak as though you can see this board in its entirety," Urahara observed. "Not entirely," Uehara admitted. "But far more than most. Enough to know that when the final pieces are in play, you'll want to be standing on the correct side. And naturally, that's your side," Urahara concluded with the faintest hint of skepticism. Uehara's laugh was genuine this time. "There are no sides, Urahara, only survivors. I'm offering you the chance to be among them." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken implications and potential futures branching out from this single conversation. "What exactly would this alliance entail?" Urahara finally asked. "For now?" "Nothing that would compromise your existing plans," Uehara assured him. "Continue your work. Observe Aizen. Prepare your little protege for what's coming. But when the time comes, and believe me, it will come sooner than you expect, remember this conversation." He rose to his feet in one fluid motion. "And remember that I offered you a choice before anyone else did." Urahara remained seated, his expression unreadable. "You're quite confident that I'll accept this generous offer?" "I'm confident that you're intelligent enough to recognize inevitability when you see it," Uehara replied, moving toward the door. "The old order is ending, Urahara. A new world is coming, one where the barriers between realms grow thinner by the day. One where power flows in directions none have anticipated." He paused at the threshold, looking back over his shoulder. "Ask yourself this, when that world arrives, do you want to be scrambling to understand it, or helping to shape it?" Without waiting for an answer, he stepped outside, leaving Urahara and Tessai in contemplative silence. Yet somehow, Uehara maintained functional relationships with all factions, the noble houses, the Gotii 13, even Aizen's circle. He stood alone, playing an intricate game against multiple powerful forces simultaneously. It was a profoundly unequal confrontation, yet time and again, Shiroa emerged victorious.
This success transcended simple explanations of superior strength or intelligence. Even Urahara Kisuke, with his legendary analytical mind, couldn't decipher how Uehara accomplished such feats. He had begun to suspect that Uehara possessed some ability comparable to that man, the one who stood above all others. Nothing else could explain the totality of his successes. Therefore, whatever such a person valued must be extraordinary indeed. With this realization, Urahara mentally reassessed the capabilities and threat level posed by the Quincy. Uehara could practically see the calculations racing behind Urahara's seemingly calm exterior. The frantic mental activity occurring behind those watchful eyes would fill volumes if transcribed. This was the advantage of knowing the plot in advance. Uehara possessed not just an intelligence advantage but comprehensive situational awareness. He could observe events unfolding with detached amusement, appreciating the blooming and falling of flowers from a distance. Meanwhile, brilliant strategists like Urahara and Aizen, with their thousand-eyed vigilance, sacrificed countless brain cells daily in their attempts to understand the bigger picture. Their mental exertion was so intense it was a wonder they hadn't gone bald from stress. Though in Aizen's case, Uehara mused, his remarkably thick hair despite constant scheming was a testament to his vanity. The man was truly devoted to his appearance, a hair gel master with exceptional grooming habits. While these thoughts drifted through his mind, Uehara deliberately changed the subject. I should thank you for the equipment you provided previously. Those items proved tremendously helpful. Though Urahara desperately wanted to understand Uehara's true assessment of the Quincy, he recognized the conversational shift as intentional. When someone of Uehara's caliber redirected a discussion, pressing the original topic would be futile. With your abilities, you could dominate any situation even without such equipment, Urahara responded, following the new conversational thread. The intelligence we exchanged was far more valuable. Without that information, we couldn't have countered Aizen's Kyoka Suigetsu. The contrast between them was striking. In the modestly appointed shop with its cluttered shelves, Uehara exuded leisurely contentment, like a sage at peace with the world. Urahara, meanwhile, maintained his outward composure while his mind raced through countless contingencies and implications. But Urahara was not one to remain off balance for long. Soon recognizing the disadvantage in his reactive posture, he seized control of the conversation. That black hollow is a forbidden existence, a manifestation of taboo power. Aizen's research has clearly reached an advanced stage, he approaches his ultimate goal. Should he perfect holification and transcend the limitations of Shinigami, the consequences would be catastrophic. His statement contained no falsehoods. Aizen had already forced them into the positions of desperate fugitives. A transcendent Aizen would be immeasurably worse. Beneath his words lay a strategic invitation, an attempt to draw Uehara into their alliance against Aizen. He implied that Aizen represented an unignorable threat while simultaneously dangling the prospect of transcendence as bait. Surely Uehara wouldn't pass up an opportunity to elevate himself to that level of power. Seeing through Urahara's intentions immediately, Uehara responded with casual indifference, becoming a transcendent isn't so simple. For nearly a millennium, none outside Squad Zero have attained that level of power. If it were otherwise, those in the Soul King Palace wouldn't maintain their exalted position. A transcendent, by definition, was an entity whose strength exceeded the inherent limitations of their species. For ordinary Shinigami, such racial limits remained entirely theoretical, their natural talents couldn't even approach these boundaries, let alone transcend them. But for apex beings like Aizen, these limitations loomed as the final barrier to ultimate power. Crossing the threshold would unlock unrestricted potential and instant transformation from mere captain to godlike entity. Urahara's expression grew more solemn. For ordinary individuals, perhaps that's true. But Aizen is extraordinary by any standard. You understand how dangerous he truly is. It was evident that Uehara possessed knowledge about the Soul King Palace and Squad Zero, information to which even Urahara had limited access. Inwardly, he marveled again at the younger man's intelligence network. Uehara ignored the subtle shift in Urahara's demeanor, continuing in the same casual tone. I maintain that transcendence remains exceptionally difficult to achieve. And who can truly predict what lies ahead? He gestured vaguely with one hand. Perhaps Aizen will experience an epiphany, realizing that his true desire has always been a peaceful existence. Or maybe a powerful enemy, one with vast resources, will invade Soul Society, intent on subjugating the three realms. In such circumstances, Aizen might become our unlikely savior. Shinigami had only two established paths to transcendence: either serve the Zero Division and receive a portion of the Soul King's power, or risk annihilation through deep hollowification. Uehara found neither option appealing. There were optimizations possible for both approaches: obtaining power directly through the Soul King's organs, or simulating the Soul King's essence to circumvent limitations. Urahara had already researched the Soul King's power extensively, even creating two candidates to potentially replace the Soul King in the future. Similarly, Aizen planned to sacrifice Karakura Town's residents to forge the Oken and create a spirit comparable to Zero Division members. If one chose hollowification, the Hogyoku could theoretically optimize the process, reducing risks while enhancing potential. Yet Uehara rejected both paths. Hollowification would compromise his appearance, and he had no intention of sacrificing his looks for power. After all, strength was temporary, but aesthetic appeal was lifelong. In the world of Bleach, appearance and style constituted their own form of power. Moreover, he harbored suspicions about the Soul King's organs and essence. Who could say what hidden mechanisms, what backdoors, the Soul King might have embedded within his own power? Chapter 84, New Special Mission. Who is the protagonist? What Urahara Kisuke was most concerned about was Uehara Shiroha's attitude toward hollowification and the Hogyoku. So, he tried again, his voice casual but his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his striped hat. With Mr. Uehara's talent, you should soon reach the very limits of what a Shinigami can achieve. Don't you desire transcendence? Uehara Shiroha met his gaze calmly, his silver eyes reflecting the dim light of the shop. His voice carried an indifference that belied the firm resolve behind his words. I do want to transcend, he admitted, one hand resting lightly on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. But I refuse to follow your path. My knees are too stiff to kneel, so I choose to stand and surpass the limits on my own terms. The shop fell silent save for the soft creaking of the wooden floorboards. Dust particles danced in the shafts of afternoon sunlight that filtered through the windows. Urahara Kisuke's expression didn't change, but his mind was already spinning with possibilities. This man, he saw through me completely. Uehara Shiroha knew exactly what Urahara was trying to do. The sly shopkeeper was subtly fanning the flames, probing his thoughts, perhaps even hoping to stir a conflict between him and Aizen. It was a delicate game of chess, with each word serving as a calculated move. Yet, instead of reacting emotionally, Uehara Shiroha's response was measured and deliberate, like a blade cutting through deception with surgical precision. Urahara's eyes narrowed slightly, the shadow from his hat obscuring the flicker of surprise that passed across his face. This wasn't what he had expected. From what he had gathered through his extensive network of informants, Uehara Shiroha didn't seem to have any interest in the Hogyoku. Does he not desire transcendence after all? Or, does he possess another method to achieve it? The thought was both intriguing and alarming. If Uehara had discovered another path to power, one that even Urahara hadn't conceived of, what might that mean for the balance of the three worlds? Once again, Urahara Kisuke found himself thrown into uncertainty. His mind, usually so sharp and adept at unraveling mysteries, had met an opponent it couldn't fully comprehend. Ever since meeting Uehara Shiroha, he had encountered more dead ends in his thinking than in the centuries since his exile. The moment Uehara Shiroha left, sliding the door shut with a gentle finality, Tessai Tsukabshi moved unnaturally fast for a man of his size, practically floating into view from the backroom where he had clearly been eavesdropping. The former Grand Keto chief gazed in the direction Uehara had gone, his deep voice carrying a note of admiration as he adjusted his rectangular glasses. Young people these days are truly astonishing, he murmured, his massive arms crossed over his broad chest. That Captain Commander is no less monstrous than the legends from 1,000 years ago. The comparison wasn't made lightly. For someone of Tessai's age and experience to draw parallels between Uehara and the ancient warriors of Soul Society spoke volumes. Then, shifting his attention to Urahara, he furrowed his brows, noting the unusual tension in his old friend's shoulders. Why do you look so grim? Tessai asked. Is the pressure really that immense?
Though he hadn't fully grasped the nuances of the verbal exchange between Urahara and Uehara, he knew Kisuke well enough to recognize when something was troubling him deeply. Urahara exhaled deeply, removing his hat and running a hand through his messy blonde hair before spreading his hands in mock helplessness. How could it not be, he said wryly, a humorless smile playing on his lips. On one side, there's Aizen, and on the other, we have Uehara Shiroha. Hearing this, Tessai's confusion deepened, his thick eyebrows drawing together. I think I understand now what Yoruchi meant, Urahara continued, replacing his hat at a slightly rakish angle. His expression turned thoughtful, almost distant. That guy really does seem like he can see through everything, even our thoughts. And yet, when it comes to his own strength and ambitions, it's as if he's shrouded in mist.
I can't get a clear read on him. I can't see through him at all.
Of course, Yoruchi had also made some, less professional comments about Uehara Shiroha. Remarks involving dangerous levels of intelligence, unreadable motives, and, of course, something about an exceptional physique that had made her golden eyes gleam with interest that extended beyond professional curiosity. But Urahara had the good sense to keep his old friend's private musings to himself. Spreading rumors about his former boss and this mysterious genius would only spell trouble. If word got out, he might not even be able to keep his shop open, let alone find a safe corner to exist in within the three realms. Yoruchi's wrath was not something even he was willing to face. More importantly, Yoruchi had been right in her assessment. Urahara had always believed that, despite his seemingly casual and unpredictable actions, Uehara Shiroha was moving with a very specific goal in mind. Even his offhand remarks likely contained hidden meanings, layered beneath complex strata of misdirection and half-truths.
The problem was, Urahara still couldn't figure out what that goal was.
This meeting should have been the perfect chance to probe Uehara, to analyze him and gather more pieces of the puzzle. Instead, he walked away with even more doubts and uncertainties clouding his brilliant mind. And then there was that one particular statement from Uehara Shiroha that troubled him most.
Aizen is nothing. He might just be the beginning.
That sentence lingered in Urahara's mind like a persistent echo, stirring an uncomfortable premonition deep within him.
What exactly does he mean by that? Did Uehara Shiroha truly not see Aizen as a significant threat?
Or worse, did he believe that Aizen was merely a stepping stone towards something far more terrifying?
The implications sent a rare chill down Urahara's spine. For someone as driven by curiosity as Urahara Kisuke, this kind of uncertainty was pure agony.
It felt like being presented with a complex equation but having half the variables obscured. It felt like Uehara was dangling answers just out of reach, teasing him without revealing anything concrete, a frustrating game that Urahara typically played with others, not one he found himself caught in. Tessai, meanwhile, was watching his old friend closely, reading the subtle shifts in his expression that few would notice.
Is he really that amazing? He asked.
He had known Kisuke for centuries, and in all those years, he had rarely seen him speak so highly of someone. Even Aizen, with all his cunning and strength, hadn't elicited this level of intrigue and respect. Urahara let out a chuckle, his lips curling into a mischievous grin that didn't quite reach his eyes.
Oh, he's that amazing. But...
He trailed off for a moment, tapping his closed fan against his chin thoughtfully, then continued, his eyes flashing with something between excitement and mischief. Aizen chose not to eliminate Mr. Uehara while he was in Hueco Mundo.
That means even he couldn't completely figure him out.
He adjusted his hat, a glimmer of satisfaction appearing in his gaze as he considered this rare alignment of circumstances. Which means that, for now, we're all standing on the same starting line again.
Urahara had no doubt that Aizen had crossed paths with Uehara multiple times in Hueco Mundo, and each time, the legendary schemer must have encountered setbacks that prevented him from making a decisive move. Whether it was Uehara's power, his intelligence, or some other factor entirely, something had given even Aizen pause. The thought was endlessly entertaining to Urahara, like a rare delicacy to be savored. I may not be able to predict what Uehara Shiroha will do next. But neither can you, Aizen.
There was nothing more amusing than seeing a so-called mastermind struggle to solve a problem they couldn't control. It was like watching a chess grandmaster finally meet an opponent who could match them move for move.
And if that mastermind happened to be an enemy? Well, then, the amusement was doubled.
Tessai stared at Urahara's smug expression inside, wondering if his friend was perhaps enjoying this dangerous stalemate a little too much. By the time Uehara Shiroa returned to the Gotei 13 base, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the training grounds.
The air was filled with the distant sounds of Shinigami practicing Kido and the rhythmic clashing of Zanpakuto. Waiting at the entrance was Mishabane, a peculiar mix of slender and plump, an odd contrast that somehow suited her elegant Shinigami robes.
Her large eyes sparkled with expectation as she caught sight of him, though her expression remained slightly blank, as if struggling to fully process her emotions. When he finally approached, she blinked a few times and, with an awkward yet sincere tone, greeted him.
"Sir, welcome back." Despite her usual air of detachment, it was obvious that she was excited.
A faint color touched her cheeks, betraying the emotion she was trying to contain with her professional demeanor. She had lived alone for so long that expressing emotions didn't come naturally to her. Years of isolation had left her social skills underdeveloped, like muscles atrophied from disuse. But Uehara Shiroha was confident that, under his influence, she would continue to improve, slowly but surely becoming more comfortable with the full spectrum of human connection. Just then, the task system in his mind pinged with a familiar notification sound, a gentle chime that only he could hear. A special mission had arrived. Special Mission 14, the three-party talks, conquer the protagonist. Objective: within Kurosaki Ichigo's body lie two powerful forces. As he awakens as a Shinigami, the true protagonist will make his presence known, demonstrating his strength before Kaiaraka Shunsui and Zangetsu to prove who the real protagonist is.
Reward: random ability or item.
Uehara Shiroha's lips curled slightly in amusement, his eyes reflecting a private understanding.
As expected. If you step into the plot, a special mission follows. This is truly a double blessing. He couldn't help but feel pleased.
To witness a famous moment in the story and receive a special mission on top of it, it was the perfect combination, like finding an unexpected treasure during an already pleasant journey. Glancing over the mission details once more, he murmured, "I like this mission, but it's going to take some time." The concept of a protagonist never really mattered to him. Such labels were arbitrary at best, meaningless at worst. If you were strong enough, then you naturally became the protagonist of your own story. If you were weak, then even if fate handed you the title, you'd be nothing more than a joke, doomed to be criticized, ridiculed, or forgotten by history's unforgiving pen. Besides, this wasn't some overpowered protagonist fantasy novel where everything revolved around a single character, or the world bent to accommodate one special individual's journey. It was Bleach. And if there was one thing consistent about the so-called protagonists in Bleach, it was that they all had tragic family issues, mother killed by a hollow, father with a secret past, sisters in constant danger. At least, they were still better off than superheroes. After all, everyone knew about Batman and Alley's dark corners where parents died and legacies were born.
Uehara had always been curious if the Justice League and Avengers ever held a reunion, how many sets of dead parents would they have between them? Probably not many survivors. Orphanhood seemed almost a prerequisite for heroism in those stories.
But he set those thoughts aside with a slight shake of his head. Such musings were entertaining but ultimately irrelevant to the task at hand.
The mission rewards were what really interested him.
That random ability or item could be the key to further advancement, another stepping stone on his path to true power.
Strength mattered more than anything. With it, he could do whatever he pleased. Protagonist or not, it was irrelevant.
Even the main characters of power fantasy novels weren't necessarily happier than him.
Fighting every day, training endlessly, living under constant pressure, was that really an enjoyable life? Always being at the center of conflict, never having a moment's peace? Not for me.
Shaking his head, Uehara turned his focus to how he would accomplish this task, his mind already mapping out potential strategies and approaches.
It wasn't just about waiting for Ichigo Kurosaki to become a Shinigami, it was about proving dominance before Kairaku and Zangetsu. That wasn't going to be easy, even for someone of his caliber.
Kairaku was one of the oldest and most powerful captains, a man whose carefree demeanor concealed deadly skill and intelligence. And Zangetsu, well, that was a complex entity altogether, a manifestation of power with its own will and purpose. Kurosaki Ichigo, even in his early days, was no ordinary young man. He carried within him Shinigami power, Hollow power, and Quincy bloodline, each formidable on its own. And combined? It was outright broken, a perfect storm of potential that could reshape worlds. From the moment Ichigo unlocked his Zanpakuto, his strength was already enough to threaten captain-level Shinigami. The boy's growth was unprecedented, defying the conventional wisdom of Soul Society that power came only through centuries of training and discipline. Uehara knew that for a long time, Ichigo had been unknowingly handicapping himself. Until he awakened his true dual Zanpakuto, he was only fighting with fragments of his power. Like a master swordsman wielding a broken blade without realizing it was incomplete. He had essentially been playing the game on hard mode without realizing it, facing opponents with one hand tied behind his back. If Uehara wanted to suppress the forces inside Ichigo's body, to demonstrate his dominance over both the Hollow and Quincy powers that resided there, his own power had to be unshakable. There could be no hesitation, no weakness for those forces to exploit. And that was where the Mind Stone came in, gleaming with subtle power from where it was embedded in his consciousness. This mission felt tailor-made for him. With the Mind Stone, controlling and overwhelming Ichigo's unstable powers was well within his capabilities. The artifact's ability to influence, dominate, and reshape mental landscapes would be the perfect counter to Zangetsu's fractured nature. In fact, this was the perfect chance to take his understanding of the Mind Stone to the next level. To push its capabilities beyond what even he had imagined possible. As for his panel stats, his Zanjutsu, Hakuda, Ho-Oh, and Kido had already reached the level of a millennium-old captain, more than enough for this task. Each discipline had been honed through countless hours of practice, until they were as natural to him as breathing. With his various trump cards, even if his raw power wasn't as overwhelming as some endgame monsters, he could still kill in an instant. Strategy and precision often trumped brute force, after all. After all, by the time the 1,000-year Blood War arc came around, battles had essentially ascended into godhood. The stakes had risen beyond conventional understanding, with powers that could reshape reality itself. Aizen's spiritual pressure theory was already outdated, the power scaling had moved on to something far more complex and devastating. What once seemed impossible had become merely difficult, and what once seemed godlike had become an everyday occurrence. With the Mind Stone, Uehara wasn't afraid of facing those monstrous powerhouses that lurked on the horizon. Let them come with their world-shattering abilities, he would be ready. Besides, considering the long duration of this mission, the reward had to be worth it. The system never gave trivial rewards for challenging tasks. Perhaps, he might even receive something stronger than the Mind Stone itself, another artifact to add to his growing collection of powers. The possibilities were endless, branching out before him like paths in a forest. The future was promising, a canvas waiting to be painted with the colors of his ambition. As he processed all this, a subtle smile appeared on his face, a rare display of genuine pleasure that softened his typically stern features. Mishabane, who had been quietly observing him with the attentiveness of a loyal subordinate, noticed his sudden shift in mood. Her eyes widened slightly in response, like a flower turning toward the sun. His happiness was infectious, seeing him pleased made her feel warm inside, a sensation she was still learning to identify and appreciate. "You focus on your training here," Uehara instructed, gently ruffling her hair in a rare gesture of affection. "I'll come check on you when I have time." "Yes, sir," she responded enthusiastically, straightening her posture with renewed determination. She watched as Uehara disappeared in a flash of Shuunpa, leaving only a gentle breeze in his wake. Then, glancing around at the now empty base, a strange sense of loneliness settled in her chest like a cold weight. For the first time, she realized people could truly feel lonely. It was an odd discovery for someone who had spent most of her existence in isolation, never knowing what she was missing until she had experienced its opposite. Returning to Soul Society. Stepping through the Senkamen, Uehara Shiroa returned to the Suriidii. The gateway between worlds closed behind him with a soft hum, sealing off the human realm from the afterlife once more.
His pristine white Haori stood out among the countless Shinigami in their traditional black uniforms, a beacon of authority in a sea of dark cloth. The symbol of the Gotei 13 was emblazoned proudly on his back, marking him as one of the 13 most powerful warriors in Soul Society. The moment they saw him, their reactions were immediate and unmistakable. Many bowed respectfully, their faces filled with admiration and awe. Some whispered to each other, pointing subtly as if confirming a legend in the flesh. Even the unruly, battle-hungry Squad 11 Shinigami, who normally scoffed at rules and authority, didn't dare act out in his presence. They might have been arrogant and reckless, hungry for combat and dismissive of protocol, but when facing Uehara Shiroha, they resembled obedient housecats rather than the wild tigers they pretended to be. Ignoring the gazes directed at him, both the respectful and the fearful Uehara moved swiftly, using Shuunpa to travel through the Siriidii. The world blurred around him as he leaped from rooftop to rooftop, his movements so fluid that they seemed almost lazy despite their incredible speed. Soon, he arrived at the Gotei 13 headquarters, more specifically, the commander's office. The imposing building stood tall against the blue sky, a testament to the power and history of Soul Society's military force. The first thing he saw was the life-sized ice sculpture he had created near the entrance, glittering in the sunlight like a diamond warning. As if on cue, Ayase Nanao emerged from the building, sensing his spiritual pressure before he had even announced his presence. Her sharp senses had always been one of her most impressive qualities. "Commander, welcome back," she greeted warmly, clutching a thick book to her chest as was her habit. Her lips curled in a small smile, and the joy in her expression was undeniable despite her attempts to maintain her usual professionalism. She was someone who rarely displayed emotions, always composed and serious, devoted to duty above all else. Yet, at this moment, she looked as if she wanted to hum a tune, a most unusual state for the typically stern vice-captain. Uehara Shiroha nodded in acknowledgement, taking note of the subtle changes in her demeanor. Such details rarely escaped his notice. He knew that whenever he left on a mission, Ayase Nanao worried about him despite her logical mind telling her that he was more than capable of handling himself. At the same time, she always looked forward to his return with an eagerness that went beyond mere professional relief. "Commander, do you want to rest first?" she asked gently. Her tone was oddly reminiscent of a wife welcoming her husband home, solicitous and warm. "I'm fine. I was just strolling around, how could I be tired?" he replied dismissively, waving away her concern. Then, turning his gaze to the ice sculpture standing near the entrance, he smirked, a playful glint appearing in his eyes. "Did the Squad 11 lunatics see this?" he asked. "What did he say? Did he run away in shame?" Standing at the entrance of the Gotei 13 headquarters, a towering 2-meter-tall ice sculpture loomed over the doorway, casting a long shadow across the threshold. The figure was sculpted with ferocity and menace, its features hardened into an expression of unrestrained battle lust. The wild, spiked hair, standing upright like porcupine quills, made it immediately recognizable even to those who had never personally encountered the original. This wasn't just any statue. This was Kenpachi Zaraki, the infamous captain of the 11th Division, a man whose very name struck fear into the hearts of many Shinigami. And the reason why this ice-cold replica stood here? Simply put, Kenpachi Zaraki was annoying. Every now and then, the battle-hungry captain would appear out of nowhere, challenging Uehara Shiroha to duel after duel with a manic grin that promised violence. His bloodthirsty nature could not be sated, his lust for battle driving him to seek out the strongest opponents regardless of rank or protocol. At first, Uehara had found some amusement in entertaining Zaraki's constant provocations. The brute had been useful for practice. A sparring partner who could take hit after hit without complaint, whose durability was matched only by his single-minded pursuit of combat. But as time passed, Kenpachi was no longer enough. The gap between them had widened too much to be bridged by mere enthusiasm. Uehara Shiroha's Zanjutsu had long surpassed the limits of a normal Shinigami. His swordplay had reached a level where fighting Kenpachi, who hadn't even unlocked Shirkai, felt like sparring with a training dummy, predictable, limited, and ultimately unsatisfying. Without his true power, Zaraki wasn't even qualified to be a stepping stone on Uehara's path to transcendence. Thus, Uehara had developed a simple solution: every time Zaraki got too persistent, he would simply freeze him solid.
A temporary measure that both incapacitated the nuisance and served as a pointed reminder of the difference in their abilities. And one day, after receiving a side mission related to sculpting, he had decided to take things a step further. Using his masterful control over ice, he had immortalized Kenpachi into a grand ice statue, placing it at the entrance as a warning sign. A scarecrow, warding off an overly persistent beast. Yet, to his surprise, the plan had backfired in the most unexpected way. Ayase Nanao covered her mouth, trying to stifle a laugh that threatened to disrupt her composed facade. No, Captain Zaraki actually likes this sculpture. He said it captures his essence perfectly. The irony wasn't lost on her, the very thing meant to deter Kenpachi had instead become a source of pride for the battle-loving captain. Uehara Shiroa paused, looking at the frozen figure again before letting out a small chuckle that carried equal parts amusement and resignation. I suppose it does. The artistic integrity is too high. That's on me. He couldn't deny that he had captured Zaraki's wild spirit with uncanny accuracy, the manic grin, the unyielding stance, the pure embodiment of battle lust. In trying to create a mockery, he had inadvertently crafted a tribute. After their brief conversation, the two entered the commander's office to handle some official business. Papers were signed, reports were reviewed, and decisions were made with the efficiency that characterized Uehara's leadership. But after that? It was time for their master-disciple interaction, the part of the day that both looked forward to more than they would admit. 20 years later. Time passed in the blink of an eye, flowing like a river that couldn't be held back. 20 years had gone by since that day, since Uehara had taken on his disciples and begun shaping them into forces to be reckoned with. Inside Training Ground Number 1 at the Gotei 13th Siriitii base, Uehara Shiroa stood before two familiar figures. The training ground was vast and open, designed to withstand even the most destructive of spiritual powers without collapsing. Facing him were Hinamori Momo and Kochiki Rukia. No longer the inexperienced girls they once were. The passage of time had tempered their spirits and strengthened their resolve. Their once naive expressions had matured into the determined gazes of warriors who had faced death and emerged stronger for it. After all, a Shinigami's spiritual pressure only grew stronger with age and experience, like fine wine gaining depth and complexity over time. Both had come a long way from their uncertain beginnings. Hinamori Momo was now the vice-captain of the 5th Division, her elegant beauty and graceful demeanor making her one of the most admired figures in the Gotei 13. Her Kido skills had blossomed under Uehara's tutelage, each spell executed with a precision that few could match. But her strength had also evolved far beyond the timid girl who once hid behind others, seeking protection rather than standing on her own. Rukia, on the other hand, remained less popular than Hinamori within the ranks of the Gotei 13, but had poured all her energy into training with single-minded dedication. Without many distractions or social obligations, she had devoted herself entirely to mastering her skills, particularly her unique ice-based abilities that resonated so well with Uehara's own mastery of the element. Yet, despite their achievements, both knew one undeniable truth that humbled them whenever they stood before their master. Without Uehara Shiroa, they would have never grown this strong so quickly. His guidance had been the catalyst that transformed potential into reality, raw talent into refined power. And they never forgot it, not for a single day. Both girls were grateful for his unwavering support. Both admired him for his unmatched skill and wisdom. And both were deeply attached to him in ways that transcended mere respect for a mentor. Uehara, pleased with their progress over the years, decided to push them a little further to see just how far they had come under his guidance. With a calm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, he gestured toward them, an invitation and a challenge in one simple movement. Hinamori, Rukia, come and show your master just how much you've grown. Then, without warning, a sliver of spiritual pressure leaked from his body. Just a fraction, a mere taste of the ocean of power he contained within himself. The moment it did, the two girls stiffened as if struck by lightning. Their previous confidence vanished, replaced with a deep, instinctual dread that reached into the most primitive parts of their minds. Gripping their zanpakuto tightly, they immediately shifted into combat stances, muscles tensed for either attack or retreat. Uehara Shiroa had always placed great emphasis on one particular lesson, perhaps the most important one a Shinigami could learn. the ability to withstand spiritual pressure. No matter how strong one's techniques were, no matter how perfect their swordplay or how devastating their Kido, if their body and mind collapsed under the weight of their opponent's Ryatsu, then nothing else mattered. All skill became meaningless in the face of overwhelming spiritual pressure. Even if they barely managed to endure it, their movements would become sluggish, their techniques clumsy, and their energy would drain faster than normal, like trying to run through deep water. In a real battle, that was the difference between victory and death. And in all of Soul Society, there was no one better suited to train this skill than Uehara Shiroha. With his Mind Stone, he could strengthen their willpower, pushing them beyond their natural limits while ensuring they didn't break under the strain. With his Horse Talisman, he could ensure they wouldn't suffer lasting injuries, allowing for recovery that would have otherwise taken weeks or months. And with Observation Haki, he could monitor their physical conditions in real time, keeping the pressure at the perfect intensity, ensuring they were pushed to their limits without breaking completely. It was a delicate balance, like a surgeon working with microscopic precision. Unlike many other instructors, Uehara never forced his disciples to take on impossible challenges that would only lead to failure and despair. He didn't expect them to defeat monsters far beyond their level, to achieve the impossible through sheer willpower alone. He only wanted them to have the ability to survive, because in the world of Shinigami, sometimes survival was the greatest victory one could hope for. If they couldn't win, then they should run, retreat, and live to fight another day. It was that simple, that practical, and that wise. Both girls were rare talents, diamonds in the rough that he had recognized long before others did. And he had every intention of nurturing them into something greater, of seeing them reach heights that would make Soul Society itself take notice. Kochiki Rukia swallowed hard, her body trembling slightly as sweat beaded on her forehead. "The teacher's aura has become even more terrifying," she whispered, her voice barely audible even in the silence of the training ground. Hinamori Momo felt the same overwhelming pressure bearing down on her. Her heartbeat accelerated, pounding in her ears like a war drum, and an unexplainable fear began creeping into her thoughts, threatening to paralyze her completely. It felt like massive boulders were pressing down on her from every direction, like she had been dropped into the depths of the ocean, struggling to move even a single muscle against the crushing weight of the water. Chapter 85, Rukia's Mission in the Real World. The beginning of Bleach's plot. However, as the saying goes, strict teachers produce excellent students. Under the meticulous training of Uehara Shiroha, both Hinamori Momo and Kochiki Rukia had developed exceptional willpower and decisive combat instincts that far surpassed their peers. They dared not disobey their teacher's words and had long ingrained his lessons into their very being, until his teachings became as natural as drawing breath. Thus, when facing a crisis, they instinctively made the best possible choices, not through conscious thought, but through the muscle memory forged in countless hours of brutal training. Snap, Tobium! With a clear and resolute cry, the youthful and determined Hinamori Momo was the first to release her Shurkai. She gripped her Zanpakuto, Tobium, its hilt adorned with soft pink wrappings that matched her determined eyes, and channeled her spiritual pressure into the blade with practiced ease. As her energy surged through the metal, a radiant pink halo illuminated the sword, encircling it with a mesmerizing glow that cast rose-colored shadows across her face. Almost simultaneously, delicate pink plum blossoms materialized from thin air, dancing around the weapon like living petals caught in an unseen breeze. The tip of the blade extended outward, branching into new forms like sprouting limbs of a plum tree reaching toward the spring sun. In its sealed state, Tobium appeared as an ordinary katana, indistinguishable from thousands of others, but upon activation, it transformed into a uniquely branched blade, signifying its fire-based nature. With its Shurkai released, Tobium gained long-range attack capabilities and exceptional flexibility, making it a formidable weapon in skilled hands. Under Uehara Shiroha's guidance, Hinamori Momo had refined her control over Tobium to levels that impressed even the most skeptical captains, enhancing her precision and versatility in combat beyond what anyone had thought possible for one so young. At the same time, Rukia swiftly followed suit, not a moment behind her training partner. Dance, Sodi no Shirayuki. With a calm yet firm declaration, she unsheathed Sodi no Shirayuki, summoning forth her Shurkai with the elegant confidence of nobility. A burst of icy spiritual pressure spread through the air like winter's first frost, as a luminous white glow enveloped the sword from hilt to tip. In the blink of an eye, her standard katana was transformed into a breathtakingly beautiful, snow-white Zanpakuto, exuding an aura of pure frost that seemed to capture the essence of the deepest winter. The long, silk-like ribbon at the end of the hilt swayed gently in the air, mirroring the elegance of falling snow against a midnight sky. As Sori no Shirayuki's power surged to its fullest, the surrounding temperature plummeted dramatically, frost crystallizing in the air as delicate snowflakes descended around her in a perfect circle. A layer of shimmering white light coalesced around the blade's surface, intensifying the weapon's chilling aura until even the training ground's hardy grass crackled with ice beneath her feet. With their Shurikai activated, Hinamori Momo and Rukia's spiritual pressure sword, dispelling the oppressive force of Uehara Shiroa's Ryatsu and allowing them to regain full combat readiness. The air around them vibrated with their combined power, a testament to how far they had come under his tutelage. Yet, despite their resolve and the impressive display of their Zanpakuto's release, Uehara Shiroa remained utterly unfazed, as if watching children play with wooden swords. Observing his two disciples with mild amusement, he offered an appreciative nod as he examined their Zanpakuto, noting the perfect control they now exhibited over their releases.
Plum blossoms and snow, what a perfect match!
Seeing such a beautiful scene in this season fills me with joy. Though his words carried a tone of genuine admiration, he remained utterly relaxed, his posture betraying not the slightest hint of concern or wariness.
His own Zanpakuto remained sheathed at his side, untouched.
After all, even if the two wielded Bankai, they would still stand no chance against him, a fact all three of them knew well. However, he had to admit that the combination of a skilled swordswoman and an exquisite Zanpakuto was indeed a sight to behold, worthy of aesthetic appreciation even separate from its combat potential. Especially Sori no Shirayuki, widely regarded as the most beautiful Zanpakuto in Seoul society, it truly lived up to its reputation.
The pure white blade gleamed with an inner light that seemed to capture the essence of winter itself, refined and deadly in its perfect simplicity.
Rukia and Hinamori exchanged a quick glance, a silent communication born of years training side by side. Without hesitation, they launched a coordinated ice and fire assault against their master, moving with the synchronization of dancers who had practiced the same routine 1,000 times. Inside the training ground, the two girls, each in their rebellious phase against their mentor's overwhelming power, moved with remarkable decisiveness, executing their long-rehearsed strategy with flawless timing. Hinamori Momo swung Tobium in a wide arc, conjuring a fiery red fireball that hurtled toward Uehara Shiroa with explosive force. The sphere of flames grew as it traveled, expanding from the size of a fist to that of a boulder, heat waves distorting the air around it. Simultaneously, Rukia flashed forward in a burst of Shuinpa, positioning herself directly in front of their mentor, her movements so swift that she appeared to materialize out of thin air.
With perfect form, she activated one of Sori no Shirayuki's most lethal abilities. First dance, White Moon. In an instant, a radiant white circle formed beneath Uehara Shiroa's feet, its circumference perfect in its geometry.
A closer look revealed that this glowing ring was not merely light but a dense accumulation of extreme cold, its presence turning the ground into a frozen battlefield that crackled with expanding frost. The frost rapidly spread outward from the circle, condensing into a towering white pillar of ice that surged skyward with explosive force, completely encasing Uehara Shiroa in a crystalline prison that reflected the light like a massive diamond. The ice was not merely cold. It was a manifestation of absolute zero, capable of freezing anything it touched to the molecular level. The seamless coordination between fire and ice made for a swift and deadly attack, the heat from Hinamori's fireball and the extreme cold from Rukia's white moon creating a thermal shock that would shatter most opponents instantly, while also eliminating any possible escape route. Excellent awareness and flawless teamwork, Uehara Shiroa remarked from within the ice, his voice carrying an unmistakable note of satisfaction that reached them despite the frozen barrier between them. Against a powerful opponent, one must use every available resource.
Hesitation is a death sentence.
His voice remained calm, untroubled by the fact that he was seemingly trapped in a pillar of ice with a fireball hurtling toward him. At the very least, you must never lose your momentum or your fate is sealed. Even as he spoke, the combined attack reached its culmination. The fiery explosion and the icy entrapment struck simultaneously, their opposing elements merging into a spectacular clash of energy that sent shockwaves through the training ground. Steam erupted where fire met ice, creating a momentary fog that obscured the impact point.
Yet, When the mist cleared, Uehara Shiroha merely swung his blade in a seemingly effortless motion, finally drawing his Zanpakuto in a movement almost too quick to follow.
It was an ordinary slash, devoid of any apparent strength, speed, or extraordinary power, just a simple, casual stroke that seemed almost contemptuous in its simplicity.
Yet, in that instant, a single arc of the blade's movement shattered everything.
The fiery explosion was snuffed out in an instant, not extinguished but simply ceased to exist, as if the very concept of flame had been cut from reality.
The towering ice pillar crumbled simultaneously, its frozen fragments scattering like fragile glass shards that caught the light as they fell.
For a moment, he simply admired the falling ice crystals, watching as they glistened in the air like diamond dust before evaporating into nothing. His demeanor suggested he had never taken the attack seriously to begin with, treating the deadly assault as merely an interesting spectacle. He cut through invisible flames.
What kind of sword technique is this?
Hinamori Momo's mind reeled with confusion, countless questions swirling in her thoughts as she tried to process what she had just witnessed. Her hands tightened around Tobium's hilt, knuckles whitening with the strain. Rukia was no less astonished, her violet eyes wide with a mixture of awe and frustration. So my white moon can be broken so easily.
As expected of Master Uehara.
Despite their strongest coordinated attack being effortlessly neutralized, the two girls were not disheartened. If anything, a fire of determination burned brighter in their eyes. This was a technique they had spent months perfecting. One they had believed capable of surprising their mentor, perhaps even forcing him to take a single step back. Yet, reality proved otherwise, hammering home once again the vast gulf that separated them from the man they both admired and feared.
Even so, disappointment did not translate into defeat.
Thanks to Uehara Shiroha's relentless training, both Hinamori and Rukia had developed a resilient spirit, one that only grew stronger in the face of adversity, that viewed each failure not as an end but as a stepping stone toward improvement. Instead of faltering, their hands instinctively moved, preparing their next moves without a moment's hesitation or self-doubt.
This was the true result of Uehara Shiroha's teaching.
The two disciples had always possessed a tenacious will and an unyielding drive to improve. Through rigorous training that would have broken lesser spirits, they had gained exceptional tactical awareness and an ironclad patience that refused to waver even in the face of overwhelming odds. This time, Hinamori once again chose not to engage in close combat where Uehara's superior swordsmanship would give him an insurmountable advantage. Instead, she extended her right hand with perfect form.
Bakuto number 26, Kyako.
Curved light, a spell to conceal presence. Her form flickered and vanished like a mirage in desert heat, both her figure and Ryatsu concealed from sight by the Kido spell that bent light around her.
Heido number 31, Shikao. Red fire cannon and explosive ranged attack.
Hidden from view, she launched a crimson fireball that crackled with destructive energy, its trajectory completely masked by her concealment spell. The enemy would have no way to predict its landing point, making it all but impossible to evade. Meanwhile, Rukia continued her relentless offensive pressure, maneuvering with swift steps as she wielded Sori no Shirayuki in a flurry of strikes, ensuring that Uehara Shiroha had no room to escape the incoming hidden attack. Her blade traced patterns of silver and white in the air, each movement precise and calculated to corral her opponent toward the unseen threat.
A combination of Kido? Not bad. Uehara Shiroha nodded in acknowledgement of Hinamori Momo's Kido talent. Her technique was well executed, and her control over spiritual energy was undoubtedly refined. The layering of a binding spell and an attack spell showed a sophistication that most lieutenant-level Shinigami couldn't match. However, it was useless against him.
Even without observation haki, his spiritual perception and spatial awareness were more than enough to track the trajectory of the attack with perfect clarity. Evading this Kido technique would be effortless, like avoiding raindrops in a light shower. Not that he needed to dodge at all. Neither Momo's Kido nor Rukia's sword techniques posed any real threat to him. Their combined attack was no more than a gentle breeze, incapable of even ruffling his clothes, let alone causing injury to someone of his caliber. In this sparring session, Uehara Shiroha had completely suppressed his strength, allowing his students to push themselves to their limits without fear of immediate defeat. If he had fought them seriously, they wouldn't have even had the opportunity to launch an attack, let alone exchange blows. His previous slash, though seemingly casual, had been executed with great restraint and precise control. If he had released even a fraction more of his power, he would have not only destroyed the attack but also fatally wounded his students in the process, perhaps even leveled the entire training ground. Now, his swordsmanship was beginning to take on the essence of true mastery, the ability to break all techniques with a single strike, to cut through not just physical matter but concepts themselves. Still, he chose to hold back, out of both respect for their efforts and as a test of their resilience. A master knew when to challenge and when to nurture, when to push and when to support. As the battle progressed, Hinamori Momo and Rukia's exhaustion became increasingly evident. Their breathing turned ragged, sweat beading on their foreheads as they struggled to maintain their fighting stance. Their once fluid movements became slower, more labored, weighed down by the depletion of their spiritual pressure and physical stamina. Even though Uehara Shiroa had restrained his power to a mere fraction of its true capacity, fighting against someone of his caliber remained an overwhelming challenge for them. His sheer presence alone exerted tremendous pressure, forcing them to remain hyper-focused and expend all their energy in a short span of time, like trying to sprint up a mountain while carrying boulders. After observing their condition with a critical eye, Uehara Shiroa took a single step back, creating distance between them and signaling the end of the session. "Alright, we'll stop here for today," he announced, his voice carrying neither praise nor criticism, merely stating a fact. Momo Hinamori's large brown eyes blinked in disbelief, her chest still heaving from exertion. "Teacher, you didn't even move a single step the entire time." Her voice carried a mixture of frustration and admiration. She and Rukia had given it their all, unleashing their most powerful techniques in perfect coordination, yet they hadn't been able to force their master to move even an inch from his starting position. It was an utterly one-sided match, a humbling reminder of how far they still had to go. Standing nearby, Rukia remained silent, her expression solemn as she sheathed Sori no Shirayuki. She, too, was dissatisfied with their performance, her pride as a Kuchiki wounded by their inability to pose even the slightest challenge to their mentor. Even though they had trained relentlessly, pushing themselves beyond their limits day after day, the gap between them and Uehara Shiroa remained insurmountable, a chasm that seemed to grow wider rather than narrower with each passing year. At that moment, Momo Hinamori's twin ponytails swayed gently in the breeze, framing her youthful face with strands of dark hair that caught the light as she moved. Unlike in the original timeline, where she had adopted a more mature bun hairstyle after becoming the 5th Division's vice-captain, a change meant to project authority and seriousness, she had chosen to keep her twin ponytails, a look reminiscent of her academy days that gave her an air of innocence at odds with her growing power. The reason? Uehara Shiroa had once casually mentioned that he liked this style, remarking that it suited her personality, a throwaway comment he had likely forgotten moments after saying it. Thus, she had never changed it, clinging to that small fragment of approval as if it were a precious gift. Though she still admired Sosuke Aizen's ideology and found resonance in his philosophical outlook, she no longer idolized him blindly as she once might have. His views on the world resonated with her intellectual curiosity, but her true source of admiration and guidance had become Uehara Shiroa instead, a shift that would unknowingly save her from the devastating betrayal that awaited in another possible future. Similarly, Rukia's fate had also shifted away from its predetermined course, branching into a new possibility. Unlike in the original timeline, where she had become withdrawn and burdened with guilt after Kaion's death, constantly punishing herself for actions she couldn't control, she had grown stronger, both mentally and emotionally, under Uehara Shiroa's influence. She still carried the pain of Kaion Shiba's death, still blamed herself for not being strong enough to prevent the tragedy that had claimed the life of her mentor and friend, but she had not allowed that grief to consume her entirety, to define her existence. In the original events, Kaion's death had left her broken, turning her into a mere shell of herself, drifting through life like a walking corpse, her eyes holding the vacant look of someone merely going through the motions of living. But now, Uehara Shiroa's presence had changed everything, redirecting the river of fate into new channels. She had found a new reason to keep moving forward, a guiding light that prevented her from sinking into the depths of despair. Though the wound remained, it no longer festered, though the scar was visible, it no longer defined her. Even so, Uehara Shiroa himself harbored his own opinions on the matter, ones he kept carefully guarded behind his inscrutable expressions. To him, Yukitake Jushiro bore the greatest responsibility for what had happened to both Kyan and Rukia, a failing of leadership that had cost one life and nearly ruined another. Under his leadership, one of his most promising subordinates, Kyan Shiba, had perished before his very eyes, while another had spiraled into depression and self-loathing. He had neither saved Kyan's life when intervention was possible nor helped Rukia overcome her emotional trauma afterward. Instead, he had watched with that same calm, sickly smile as his subordinates suffered, offering platitudes instead of solutions. And this wasn't the first time Yukitake had failed those under his care. Before Kyan, he had also been unable to save Kugo Jinjo, allowing the first substitute Soul Reaper to fall into darkness and rebellion without making a genuine effort to understand his grievances. Apart from his achievements in combat and his reputation for kindness, Yukitake Jushiro had little to show for his centuries-long tenure as a captain. For all his supposed wisdom, he had consistently failed to protect those who needed him most. At least, that was how Uehara Shiroha saw it. After a brief pause, Uehara Shiroha looked at his two disciples and nodded, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "I thought you both did well today. I was considering giving you a reward." Both Hinamori Momo and Rukia's eyes lit up at the prospect, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Rewards from their master were rare and precious things, to be treasured and remembered. "But since you feel dissatisfied with your performance, I suppose I'll have to change the reward into a punishment." A mischievous smile curled at his lips, transforming his usually stern features into something almost boyish, despite the threat in his words. "Who wants to go first?" "No way." Hinamori's cheeks instantly flushed red, the color spreading across her face like wildfire. Almost instinctively, she moved her hands to shield the lower part of her back, as if anticipating something she had experienced before. "Punish Rukia instead. She actually enjoys it." Rukia's eyes widened in shock, violet irises expanding with indignation at the betrayal. "Excuse me? You're the one who enjoys it, not me." The two girls glared at each other, their competitive spirits reigniting in an instant, previous camaraderie forgotten in the face of potential embarrassment. Just moments ago, they had been working together seamlessly, executing perfectly synchronized attacks against a common opponent, but now? They had turned on each other without hesitation, exposing one another's embarrassing secrets in a petty battle of words that belied their usual dignity and composure. Their so-called sisterhood shattered in mere seconds, proving that even the closest bonds could fracture under the right pressure. Uehara Shiroha's smile grew wider, like an assassin about to strike his unsuspecting targets, reveling in their discomfort. "No need to argue," he said, his voice deceptively gentle. "I'll be fair. One each." Smack! Smack! Two sharp slaps echoed through the air, crisp and final. Both Momo and Rukia yelped in protest, their hands flying to cover their stinging rears. Their faces turned crimson, their eyes watery, their expressions utterly pitiful as they hopped from foot to foot, trying to alleviate the sting. Meanwhile, Uehara Shiroha simply nodded to himself, satisfied with the impromptu discipline session. "Yes, they're growing well. Very healthy. Truly, I am a responsible teacher who deeply cares about my students' development." His self-congratulatory tone held a hint of genuine pride beneath the teasing. They had indeed come far under his guidance, blossoming from uncertain recruits into formidable warriors. Then, as if remembering something important, his expression turned serious, the playfulness vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "Rukia, I heard that you've been assigned to guard Karakura town?" Rukia, still trying to compose herself, quickly straightened up, recognizing the shift in her teacher's demeanor. Suppressing both the lingering embarrassment and the numbness in her body, she responded with the formal tone expected of a Kuchiki. "Yes, teacher. I will carry out my duty with everything I have. I will not bring shame to your name." Her tone was resolute, carrying the weight of both her family's honor and her personal determination to make her mentor proud. Uehara Shiroha glanced at Rukia, then shifted his gaze to Hinamori Momo, who stood beside her, still blushing like a flustered quail caught in unexpected sunlight. His expression turned thoughtful, eyes distant as if seeing beyond the present moment into futures yet to unfold. The plot was finally beginning, the wheels of fate starting their inexorable turn. With Rukia's impending deployment to the real world's Karakura town, the chain of events that would shape the future of Soul Society was about to unfold, a cascade of causes and effects that would ultimately change everything. Before long, Rukia would meet Kurosaki Ichigo, an encounter that would alter the course of history for 3 worlds. She would transfer her Soul Reaper powers to him, an act of desperation and sacrifice. And then Ichigo would officially begin his journey as a substitute Soul Reaper, embarking on his monster-slaying and leveling up adventure that would eventually lead him to challenge gods themselves. Rukia, on the other hand, would lose most of her Soul Reaper abilities, becoming vulnerable and weak, unable to fight like before, a temporary setback that would nonetheless have profound consequences. Then, as the Hogyoku came into play, Aizen would make his move, revealing the elaborate deception he had maintained for centuries. In the chaos that followed, his other apprentice, Hinamori Momo, would unwittingly prove her legendary durability. Despite suffering multiple fatal injuries that would kill any normal Shinigami, she would somehow remain alive and kicking. A true cockroach-tier existence in terms of survival against all odds. Uehara Shiroa sighed internally. Now that the main story had begun, his 2 apprentices would have to endure their own set of hardships, trials by fire that would test their limits and force them to grow beyond what even they believed possible. But he had no intention of interfering with the natural flow of events. A Soul Reaper's lifespan was incredibly long, stretching across centuries. Over the course of hundreds or even thousands of years, it was inevitable that they would experience countless setbacks and challenges. That was the nature of existence. After all, aside from him, the strongest prodigy of all time, who else had ever walked a completely smooth path without obstacles or suffering? Hardships were unavoidable, as certain as the cycle of life and death itself. But at the same time, adversity breeds growth, tempering the spirit like fire tempers steel. If Rukia and Momo wanted to become truly stronger, they had to experience failure. Only through enduring trials would they obtain the opportunity to evolve and transform into something greater than their present selves. Pain and progress were 2 sides of the same coin, inseparable and eternal. They might curse him now for his apparent indifference, might question why he wouldn't intervene when he clearly had the power to do so, but one day, they would understand his good intentions, would recognize that true strength came not from being protected but from learning to stand on one's own. Still, since he was feeling somewhat conscientious about sending them off to face their destinies, he decided to offer a little warning, cryptic enough to maintain the timeline but clear enough to plant seeds of caution. Rukia, be careful of a yellow-haired brat, he said, his tone casual yet carrying a hint of genuine concern. Hinamori, watch out for a 4-eyed guy. Both Hinamori and Rukia looked at him, confusion evident in their expressions as they tried to decipher his meaning. Who were these people? What danger did they pose? But neither questioned his words aloud, accepting the warning as they did all his teachings. Even if their teacher's statements were strange and unclear, they trusted him completely, a faith built on years of guidance that had never led them astray. Even though the situation earlier had been a little embarrassing, they still cherished every moment spent with him, storing away memories to sustain them in the times ahead. In fact, they secretly wished to spend more time by his side, to draw even closer to their teacher, desires they kept carefully hidden, even from themselves. As night fell over Soul Society, painting the sky in shades of indigo and deep purple, Uehara Shiroa returned to his underground base, a space that had grown increasingly luxurious over the years, evolving from a simple training facility to a personal sanctuary worthy of a king. The entrance, hidden from all but a select few, led down to a complex that rivaled the noble houses in its opulence. Crystal chandeliers illuminated marble floors, while bookshelves filled with rare texts lined the walls of his study. Training areas equipped with the finest technology sat alongside meditation chambers designed for perfect serenity. The first thing he did upon entering was check his status panel, a habit formed over decades, the spectral interface appearing before his eyes with a mere thought. Status panel. Name, Uehara Shiroa. Position, 3rd seat of the 1st Division, Captain Commander of the Court Army. Spiritual pressure, 1st class spiritual power. Zanpakuto, Shunkyo, 2nd stage Bankai. Combat skills. Zanjutsu, swordsmanship 1000-year captain level. Hakuta, hand-to-hand combat 1000-year captain level. Kido, demon arts 1000-year captain level. Shuinpa, flash step 1000-year captain level. Abilities. Shadow clone technique, B rank,
perfect. Stand, White Album, S rank, perfect. Sun breathing style, B rank, perfect. Angel power, universal barrier, S rank, perfect. Magic skill, 7 flashes, A rank, perfect. Observation hockey, A rank, perfect.
Since no new special missions had been completed since his last check, the number of items in his inventory remained unchanged, a fact that would have disappointed him in earlier years. But at this point, it hardly mattered.
His raw power was already overwhelming, making lower-tier items completely irrelevant to his growth.
Common rewards that would have thrilled him in the past now held all the appeal of children's toys to an adult. What he needed was something at the absolute peak, an artifact like the Mind Stone, capable of reshaping reality itself rather than merely enhancing existing abilities. Over the past 20 years, he had accumulated over 15,000 attribute points through consistent effort and strategic planning, bringing his spiritual pressure to its pinnacle.
The level of first-class Soul Reapers, those legendary beings whose names were whispered with reverence.
Many of his most used techniques had reached the state of perfection, including sun breathing, 7 flashes, and his signature abilities, each one honed through countless repetitions until they were as natural as breathing. Even more exciting was the impending evolution of 2 of his strongest skills.
Shadow Clone, multiple Shadow Clones. White Album Requiem.
A truly terrifying leap in power that would place him firmly among the most formidable beings in existence. Of course, none of this came easily, despite his nonchalant attitude. To complete his tasks, he had to endure countless hardships, fishing at pristine lakes while contemplating strategy, playing cards with worthy opponents to sharpen his mind, and drinking leisurely with interesting companions to gather information.
Truly, an exhausting life of sacrifice and dedication. But now, the days of struggle were over, the groundwork laid for what was to come. As he observed his fully optimized panel, confidence surged through him like a current of electricity, invigorating and empowering.
It was finally time for Kurosaki Ichigo, the so-called future savior, to receive his wake-up call from reality, to learn that destiny wasn't a straight path but a winding road filled with unexpected challenges. In just 2 days, his special mission would commence, putting his preparations to the test. His control over the Mind Stone had also strengthened considerably over the years, giving him a near-absolute advantage over spiritual spaces and mental constructs. If everything went according to plan, he would intervene in Ichigo's inner world, much like Hyasuba Chibe with his power over names, and subdue both Zangetsu and Hollow, the dual spirits that represented Ichigo's fragmented power. Soon, Ichigo would step onto the stage of destiny, beginning his journey as a Soul Reaper with all the uncertainty and potential that entailed.
And when the time came, Uehara Shiroa would make his move, inserting himself into the narrative as both observer and catalyst. As long as he could intimidate both Zangetsu and Hollow, demonstrating his superiority without disrupting the essential flow of events, the special mission would be completed, unlocking new rewards and possibilities. What would the reward be this time?
After 20 years of waiting, of careful preparation and strategic patience, he was eager to find out, like a child on the eve of a festival, anticipation building with each passing moment. The red wine had been prepared. The rewards had better be worth it. While lost in thought about impending missions and potential rewards, Uehara Shiroa undressed and entered the hot spring that sat at the heart of his private quarters. A luxury he had installed years ago, modeled after the finest healing springs in Soul Society. As steam rose around him in ghostly tendrils, he exhaled slowly, feeling a wave of comfort wash over him as the mineral-rich water eased the tension from muscles that rarely had the chance to fully relax. Just then, a familiar spiritual pressure approached, distinctive in its feline grace and predatory intensity. He didn't move, didn't react outwardly, though a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Soon, the presence drew nearer, until he could feel it pressing against his body with deliberate intent, challenging, teasing, promising. In a flash too quick for most eyes to follow, a slender right arm snaked around his neck from behind, and a graceful, athletic figure wrapped around him like a temptress, strong, agile, and utterly wild in her confidence.
"Ho, you again?"
Uehara Shiroa didn't even need to look, didn't need visual confirmation of what his other senses had already told him. Just by feeling the smooth, toned legs coiling around his lower abdomen with a familiarity born of previous encounters, he already knew exactly who had decided to invade his private sanctuary.
Shihoin Yoruchi.
Her touch was familiar, her strength undeniable even in this moment of apparent vulnerability. There was no hesitation in her actions, a mix of raw seduction, playfulness, and aggressive dominance that was uniquely hers, that reflected the centuries she had spent answering to no one but herself. At this moment, they were stripped of all barriers, both physical and emotional, two beings of immense power engaging in a dance as old as time itself. That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World.
Thanks so much for listening.
As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well.
See you in the next one.